Sarah Mitchell pulled her wool coat tighter as the wind howled across the Montana plains. The 24-year-old cowgirl had been riding fence lines for her family's ranch when the blizzard hit without warning. Snow fell so thick she could barely see her horse's ears in front of her. "Easy, Thunder," she whispered to her black mare, feeling the animal's nervous energy beneath her. The temperature had dropped to 20 degrees in the past hour, and Sarah knew they needed shelter fast. She had grown up on this land, learned to ride before she could properly walk, and helped her father manage cattle through countless harsh winters. But this storm felt different, meaner, the kind that could kill a person caught in the open. As Thunder picked his way carefully through the deepening snow, Sarah's sharp eyes caught something unusual near a cluster of bare cottonwood trees, dark shapes that didn't belong in the white landscape. Her heart jumped when she realized what she was seeing. Two small figures huddled together against a fallen log, barely moving. "Children," Sarah urged Thunder forward, fighting against the wind that seemed determined to push them back. As she got closer, her breath caught in her throat. Two young Native American girls, maybe 8 and 10 years old, sat pressed together under a thin blanket. Their lips were blue and their small bodies shook violently from the cold. The older girl looked up at Sarah with eyes full of fear and defiance, even in her desperate state. She pulled the younger child closer, as if protecting her from this stranger on horseback. The little one's eyes were barely open, and Sarah could see she was in serious trouble. "I'm here to help," Sarah called out, dismounting quickly. The older girl said something in a language Sarah didn't understand, but the tone was clear. "Stay away." Sarah moved slowly, keeping her hands visible. She had learned enough about the Sioux people from her interactions at the trading post to know that trust didn't come easily, especially between their peoples. The government had forced many tribes onto reservations, and tensions ran high across the territory. But right now, none of that mattered. These were children, and they were dying. The wind picked up again, and Sarah made a quick decision. She pulled off her heavy coat and stepped toward the girls. The older one tried to stand, but her legs gave out from the cold and exhaustion. "Please," Sarah said, kneeling down and offering her coat. "Let me help you." The older girl's eyes darted between Sarah's face and the warm coat. Her little sister made a weak sound, and that seemed to break the older girl's resolve. She nodded slightly and allowed Sarah to wrap the coat around both of them. "Can you understand me?" Sarah asked gently. The older girl nodded again. "My name is Sarah. What are your names?" "Ayanna," the older girl whispered through chattering teeth, then pointed to her sister. "Winona," Sarah's mind raced. She needed to get these girls warm and dry immediately, but her ranch was still 3 miles away through the storm. Thunder could carry all 3 of them, but it would be a dangerous ride. "How long have you been out here?"
Sarah asked as she checked Winona's condition.
The little girl's breathing was shallow and her skin felt like ice. "Since morning," Ayanna managed to say. "We got lost picking berries. The storm came so fast." Sarah looked around at the barren landscape. There were no berry bushes for miles in any direction. These girls had been wandering for much longer than they realized, probably going in circles as the weather closed in. She lifted Winona carefully, surprised by how light the child felt. Ayanna struggled to stand, and Sarah supported her with one arm while holding her sister with the other. "We're going to my home," Sarah said firmly. "You'll be safe there." Getting all 3 of them onto Thunder's back took several tries. The horse sensed the urgency and stood perfectly still as Sarah positioned the girls in front of her. She wrapped her arms around both children and took up the reins. "Hold on tight," she told Ayanna. "We're going home." As Thunder began the treacherous journey through the blizzard, Sarah wondered about these 2 girls. How had they gotten so far from their people? Where was their family? Were others out searching for them in this deadly storm? The wind cut through her shirt like knives now that she had given away her coat. But Sarah ignored the cold. She had to focus on getting these children to safety. Every step Thunder took through the snow brought them closer to warmth, food, and medicine. Behind them, their tracks were already being erased by the falling snow. Soon there would be no trace of where they had been or which direction they had come from. Sarah realized that finding these girls' people would be nearly impossible once the storm passed. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, her only job was keeping Ayanna and Winona alive. The warm glow of the ranch house windows appeared through the swirling snow like beacons of hope. Sarah had never been so grateful to see her family's home as Thunder struggled through the last 100 yards to the barn. "Papa, Mama?" Sarah called out as loudly as she could over the wind. The front door flew open immediately, and her father emerged with a lantern, followed closely by her mother. "Sarah, thank God." Her mother Elizabeth cried out. "We've been worried sick about you." "I found 2 children," Sarah shouted back, carefully dismounting while keeping hold of little Winona. "They're in bad shape." Her father, Robert Mitchell, wasted no time asking questions. He lifted Ayanna down from Thunder while Sarah carried Winona toward the house. Elizabeth rushed ahead to hold the door open against the fierce wind. The warmth of the house hit them like a wall. Sarah's mother immediately began issuing orders with the calm efficiency of a woman who had raised 6 children on the frontier. "Robert, get more wood on the fire. Sarah, bring that little one to the kitchen. I'll heat some broth and get blankets warmed by the stove." Sarah gently placed Winona on a chair near the kitchen fireplace, while her father helped Ayanna sit down beside her sister. Both girls looked around with wide, frightened eyes at their unfamiliar surroundings. "It's all right," Sarah said softly, kneeling in front of them. "You're safe now." Elizabeth appeared with an armload of quilts that had been warming by the stove. She began wrapping the girls carefully, her experienced hands checking for signs of frostbite on their fingers and toes. "No permanent damage that I can see," she murmured to Sarah, "but they're severely undernourished and exhausted." "When did they last eat?" Ayanna looked up at Elizabeth with confusion. Sarah realized the girl might not understand all the English words being spoken so quickly around her. "Food?" Sarah asked, simply pointing to her mouth. "When did you last eat food?" Ayanna held up 2 fingers, then 3, seeming uncertain. Sarah's heart sank. These children had been surviving in the wilderness for days, not hours. Robert returned from tending to Thunder, stomping snow off his boots at the door. He was a tall, weathered man with kind eyes, who had always taught his children that helping others was simply the right thing to do. "Storm's getting worse," he reported. "We won't be able to travel anywhere tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either." Elizabeth ladled warm beef broth into 2 bowls and handed them to the girls. Winona's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the spoon, so Sarah helped guide it to her lips. The warm liquid seemed to bring some life back into the little girl's eyes. "Slow sips," Elizabeth advised gently. "Too much too fast will make you sick." As the girls ate, Sarah studied their clothing. Their dresses were traditional Sioux garments, beautifully made with intricate beadwork, but torn and dirty from their ordeal. Their moccasins were worn through in places, providing little protection against the snow and cold. "They're from the reservation," Robert said quietly to Sarah. "Probably the Pine Ridge settlement, about 30 miles northeast of here." Sarah nodded. She had visited the trading post near Pine Ridge several times with her father. The conditions there were harsh, with the government providing inadequate food and supplies. It wasn't uncommon for families to send their children out to forage for anything edible to supplement their meager rations. "Ayanna," Sarah said gently, "where is your family? Your mother and father?" The older girl's eyes filled with tears. She spoke rapidly in her native language, gesturing with her hands. Sarah caught a few words she recognized: lost, home, and what sounded like hungry. Elizabeth brought over warm, wet cloths to clean the girls' faces and hands. As she gently wiped away the dirt and dried tears, both children began to look more alert. "You have such pretty names," Elizabeth said with a warm smile. "Ayanna and Winona. Do you know what your names mean?" Ayanna looked surprised that this white woman knew their names had meanings. She nodded shyly. "Ayanna means eternal flower," she said in careful English. "Winona means firstborn daughter." "Beautiful names for beautiful girls," Elizabeth said. "And my name is Elizabeth. This is my husband Robert, and our daughter Sarah, who found you." The girls looked between the 3 adults, still wary but no longer terrified. The warmth of the house, the full bellies, and the gentle treatment they were receiving seemed to be helping them trust their rescuers. "Are you feeling warmer now?" Sarah asked. Both girls nodded. "Good. Tonight you'll sleep in warm beds, and tomorrow when the storm passes we'll figure out how to get you home to your people." Ayanna's face fell at the mention of going home. She said something to Winona in their language, and the little girl's eyes widened with fear. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, sensing there was more to their story than just getting lost while picking berries. Ayanna looked down at her hands, struggling with how to explain in English. Finally, she looked up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "We cannot go home," she whispered. "There is no food. People are dying. Grandmother sent us to find help, but we got lost. If we go back with nothing, She didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. The three adults exchanged meaningful glances. These children weren't just lost. They were on a desperate mission to save their starving people. And now they were afraid to return empty-handed, fearing they would be blamed for failing in their task. Sarah reached out and gently took Ayana's hand. "Don't worry about that now. You're safe here and we'll figure out how to help. I promise." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the warm kitchen, two frightened children were beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. The blizzard raged for 3 days, making travel impossible. During this time, Ayana and Winona slowly began to trust their unexpected hosts. Elizabeth treated their minor injuries and fed them nourishing meals, while Robert whittled small wooden toys by the fire to entertain them. Sarah found herself drawn to the girls, especially Ayana, who was clearly intelligent and brave beyond her years. On the second evening, as they all sat around the fireplace, Ayana began to share more of their story. "Our village has been hungry for many moons," she explained, her English improving with practice. "The government promised food, but little comes. What arrives is often spoiled or not enough." Sarah listened with growing anger and sadness. She had heard rumors of the poor conditions on the reservations, but seeing these two thin children made the reality hit home. "Grandmother is the oldest in our village," Ayana continued, stroking Winona's hair as her little sister dozed against her. "She remembers the old days before the soldiers came. She told us there were white people who traded fairly, who helped when times were hard." "She sent you to find these people?" Elizabeth asked gently. Ayana nodded. "She said to look for the house with many horses and cattle, where smoke always rises from the chimney." She described this place, though I do not know how she knew of it. Robert and Sarah exchanged glances. The Mitchell Ranch was indeed known throughout the territory for its large herd and the hospitality Elizabeth showed to travelers. But it seemed impossible that an elderly Sioux woman would know such specific details. "What is your grandmother's name?" Robert asked. "She is called Wakanda," Ayana replied. "It means possesses magic in our language. The people say she can see things that others cannot." Sarah's father sat up straighter. "Wakanda. I knew a woman by that name many years ago. Before you were born, Sarah? It was during the harsh winter of 1875. He stared into the fire, remembering. A group of Sioux had become separated from their tribe during a blizzard, much like this one. They had an elderly woman with them who was very sick. We took them in for nearly 2 weeks until she recovered enough to travel." "What did she look like?" Ayana asked eagerly. "Small and thin, but with the strongest eyes I've ever seen. She spoke perfect English, said she had learned it from missionaries as a child. And she had a scar on her left hand, shaped like a crescent moon." Ayana gasped and grabbed Winona, waking her sister up. She spoke rapidly to Winona in their language, and the little girl's eyes grew wide. "That is our grandmother," Ayana exclaimed. "The scar is from when she was young and grabbed a hot coal to save her baby brother from a fire." "She still has it," Robert smiled. "Then I understand why she knew to send you here. Your grandmother saved my cattle that winter. She showed me which plants could supplement their feed when our hay ran low. Without her knowledge, we would have lost most of our herd." "She never told us she knew you," Ayana said, wonder in her voice. "That sounds like Wakanda," Robert chuckled. "She always said she would repay the kindness someday, but I told her that her help with the cattle was payment enough." "I guess she didn't agree." Sarah leaned forward. "What exactly did she tell you to ask for, Ayana?" The girl looked nervous. "She said to ask for food for the winter and—" She hesitated. "And what?" Sarah encouraged. "Seeds for planting. And maybe some cattle if the people were very generous. She said the children in our village need milk, and we could learn to raise cattle like the white farmers do." Elizabeth looked at her husband and daughter. Sarah could see her parents were thinking the same thing she was. The Mitchells had always been successful ranchers, blessed with good land and healthy herds. They had more than enough to share. "How many people are in your village?" Robert asked. "About 150, Ayana replied. "Maybe 30 children." That night, after the girls had gone to sleep in Sarah's bed while she took the couch, the family held a quiet conference in the kitchen. "We can't just send them back with empty hands," Elizabeth said firmly. "Those children will starve." "I agree," Robert said. "But it's not just about giving them food. If we're going to help, we need to do it right. They need to learn to be self-sufficient." Sarah had been thinking about this for hours. "What if I went back with them?" "I could teach them about cattle ranching, help them get started." The reservation has good grazing land. It's just been mismanaged. Her parents looked at her with concern. That could be dangerous, Sarah, her mother said. The tensions between our peoples are still high. You could be seen as an outsider trying to interfere. Or, Sarah countered, I could be seen as someone honoring a debt of gratitude. Wakanda helped save our ranch once. Now we help save her people. Robert rubbed his beard thoughtfully. It would have to be done carefully. We'd need to approach their chief properly, show respect for their customs and authority. Ayanna says their chief is her uncle, Sarah said. His name is Standing Bear. She says he's a good man who puts his people's welfare above his own pride. I've heard of him, Robert acknowledged. He's known as a reasonable leader who tries to work within the system to help his people. Elizabeth reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. Are you sure about this, daughter? It would mean leaving the ranch for months, maybe longer. Sarah thought of little Winona's thin face and Ayanna's courage in trying to save her people. She thought of all the privileges she had enjoyed growing up on the ranch, never knowing true hunger or cold. I'm sure, Mama. This is something I need to do. Outside, the wind finally began to die down. The storm was passing, and soon they would all have to face the challenges that lay ahead. But for the first time since finding the girls, Sarah felt hopeful about the future. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for a journey that would change all their lives. Tonight, they were simply a family who had chosen to open their hearts to two children in need, and discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. When the blizzard finally ended on the fourth day, the world outside looked like a different place. Snow lay 3 feet deep across the prairie, creating rolling white hills where none had existed before. The sun emerged bright and sharp, making the entire landscape sparkle like diamonds. Sarah stood at the window watching her father and their ranch hands dig paths to the barn and corral. The cattle had weathered the storm well in their sheltered areas, and the horses were eager to stretch their legs in the crisp morning air. Today we must decide, Ayanna said quietly, joining Sarah at the window. The older girl had been growing more anxious as the storm cleared, knowing they would soon have to choose between returning to their starving village or staying safe at the ranch. We've already decided, Sarah replied firmly. We're going with you and we're bringing help. Ayanna's eyes widened. All of you? Not all of us. I'll come with you and Winona, along with supplies and some cattle. My parents will stay here to manage the ranch. The plan they had developed over the past 3 days was ambitious but necessary. Robert had selected 20 young cattle from their herd, 10 pregnant cows and 10 calves that could form the foundation of a breeding program for the Sioux village. They had also loaded 3 wagons with sacks of flour, dried beans, salt pork, and other preserved foods that would help the village survive the remainder of winter. Most importantly, Sarah had packed seeds for spring planting, corn, beans, squash, and vegetables that would grow well in the reservation soil. She had also included farming tools and written instructions for crop rotation and soil improvement. But why would you do this for people you do not know? Ayanna asked, confusion evident in her voice. Sarah turned to face the girl fully. Because your grandmother helped my family when we needed it. Because you and Winona deserve to be rescued from that storm. And because it's simply the right thing to do. The real preparations began that morning. Robert and his men worked to modify one of the wagons to carry the most fragile supplies and provide shelter for the girls during the journey. Elizabeth packed medicines, blankets, and clothing suitable for the harsh reservation conditions. Sarah spent time with Ayanna, learning basic phrases in the Lakota language and understanding more about Sioux customs and protocols. She knew that arriving unannounced with wagons and cattle could be seen as an invasion, rather than assistance if not handled properly. When we arrive at your village, what should I do first? Sarah asked as they worked together to bundle medical supplies. You must ask to speak with Chief Standing Bear, Ayanna explained. But first you should present yourself to the Council of Elders. They will want to know your intentions. Will they trust me? Ayanna considered this carefully. When they see that you brought us home safely, and when grandmother speaks for you, yes. But there may be some who are suspicious. Some of our people have been hurt too many times by broken promises. Sarah understood. The history between white settlers and Native Americans was filled with betrayal and broken treaties. Her gesture of goodwill might be seen as just another attempt to gain something in return. What if I were to formally present these gifts to Chief Standing Bear in front of the whole village? Sarah suggested. Make it clear that I expect nothing in return except the chance to teach some of your people about cattle ranching? That would be good, Ayanna agreed. Very respectful. But you should also bring a gift specifically for the chief, something that shows honor. Sarah thought about this. What could she offer that would demonstrate respect without seeming to buy favor? Then she remembered something her father had mentioned. That evening, Robert presented Sarah with a magnificent saddle that had belonged to his own father. The leather was tooled with intricate designs and silver conchos decorated the sides. It was a family heirloom, but also a practical gift that any horseman would appreciate. Grandfather Mitchell made this saddle himself, Robert explained to Ayanna and Winona as they admired the craftsmanship. He learned leatherworking from a Mexican vaquero who taught him that a good saddle was the most important tool a cowboy could own. It's beautiful, Ayanna breathed, running her fingers over the smooth leather. Tell Chief Standing, Bear that it comes with my respect and the hope that our peoples can help each other, Robert said. The next 2 days were spent in final preparations. The weather held clear and cold, perfect for traveling over the snow-packed ground. Sarah practiced driving the lead wagon while her father and the ranch hands trained the cattle to follow in a group. Winona had recovered completely from her ordeal and was now helping wherever she could, her cheerful nature making everyone smile. She had taken a particular liking to Elizabeth, following her around the kitchen and trying to learn English words for everything she saw. Cow, Winona would say carefully, pointing out the window. Very good, Elizabeth would praise. And what sound does a cow make? Moo! Winona would giggle, delighting in the silly noise. On their last evening at the ranch, Elizabeth prepared a special dinner with all of the girls' favorite foods they had discovered during their stay. As they sat around the table, Sarah felt both excitement and nervousness about the journey ahead. I want you to promise me something, Elizabeth said to Sarah as they cleared the dishes. Promise me you'll come home if things become dangerous. No amount of good intentions is worth losing you. I promise, Mama, Sarah replied, hugging her mother tightly. But I also think this is going to work out better than any of us expect. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about what awaited them. In a few days, she would be entering a world completely different from her own, trying to help people she had never met, solve problems she only partially understood. But when she looked at Ayanna and Winona sleeping peacefully in the bed beside her, she knew she was making the right choice. These children had shown incredible courage in trying to save their people. The least she could do was help them succeed. Tomorrow, their real adventure would begin. Tomorrow, they would start the journey that would test everything Sarah thought she knew about courage, friendship, and what it truly meant to be neighbors in the vast American frontier. The journey to Pine Ridge began at dawn on a crystal-clear morning. Sarah sat on the wagon seat beside Ayanna, who was guiding them along trails that were invisible to white eyes, but as clear as roads to someone who had grown up on this land. Behind them, 2 more wagons followed, driven by Tom and Miguel, trusted ranch hands who had volunteered for the journey. The cattle moved in a loose group alongside the wagons, their breath creating clouds of steam in the cold air. Winona rode in the back of the lead wagon, wrapped in warm blankets and peering out at the snowy landscape with wide eyes. She had been quiet since leaving the ranch, perhaps understanding that they were returning to a place of hunger and hardship. How far is it? Sarah asked as they topped a ridge and looked out over endless white plains. 2 days if the weather stays good, Ayanna replied. But we must be careful. Sometimes there are soldiers who patrol this area. Sarah had considered this possibility. Technically, the cattle and supplies they carried could be seen as trading with the reservation without proper permits. The government strictly controlled what could be brought to the Sioux settlements, often blocking aid that was desperately needed. If we encounter soldiers, let me do the talking, Sarah said. I have papers from my father showing that we're returning lost children to their families. The first day passed without incident. They made good time across the frozen ground, and the cattle seemed to be handling the journey well. That evening they made camp in a sheltered valley, building a large fire and sharing a meal of hot stew and fresh bread that Elizabeth had packed. Tomorrow we will reach the boundaries of our land, Ayanna said, as they settled down for the night. You will see our village by afternoon. Sarah tried to imagine what awaited them. She had visited trading posts near reservations before, But she had never actually been inside a Sioux settlement. Would the people welcome her help or see her as an intruder? "Are you nervous?" Ayanna asked, seeming to read her thoughts. "A little," Sarah admitted. "I want to help, but I don't want to make things worse by not understanding your customs." "You saved our lives," Ayanna said simply. "That speaks louder than any customs." The second day brought new challenges. Clouds moved in during the morning and light snow began to fall. The cattle became restless, and the wagons had to navigate increasingly difficult terrain as they entered the reservation lands. Sarah began to see signs of the hardship Ayanna had described. They passed abandoned camps where families had obviously tried to find shelter, only to move on when resources ran out. The few people they encountered looked thin and worn, eyeing the supply wagons with barely concealed hope. "Word will spread quickly that we are coming," Ayanna explained. "People will wonder what the wagons carry." As they crested the final hill, Sarah got her first view of the Sioux village. It was larger than she had expected, with perhaps 40 lodges scattered along a partially frozen stream. Smoke rose from only about half the dwellings, and Sarah could see that many families were sharing lodges to conserve firewood. People began emerging from their homes as the wagons approached. Sarah could see the mixture of curiosity and wariness on their faces. Children hung back behind their parents, but their eyes were fixed on the cattle following the wagons. "There," Ayanna pointed to a lodge near the center of the village that was larger than the others. "That is where Chief Standing Bear lives. And there," her voice broke with emotion, "there is Grandmother." An elderly woman emerged from a lodge near the chief's dwelling. Despite her age and the harsh winter, she stood straight and proud, her dark eyes taking in every detail of their arrival. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the crescent-shaped scar on the woman's left hand. "Wakanda," Sarah said softly. The old woman's eyes met Sarah's across the village, and slowly a smile spread across her weathered face. She said something to the people gathered around her, and Sarah saw several of them relax their defensive postures. Chief Standing Bear emerged from his lodge as the wagons came to a stop in the village center. He was a tall, dignified man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. Sarah could see the family resemblance to Ayanna in his strong features. Ayanna and Winona climbed down from the wagon and ran to their grandmother. The reunion was emotional but brief. Wakanda quickly sent the girls to their parents' lodge, then approached the wagons with Chief Standing Bear. Sarah climbed down from her wagon seat, her heart pounding. This was the moment that would determine whether her mission succeeded or failed. She had rehearsed what she would say, but now surrounded by dozens of watching faces, her mind went blank. Then Wakanda stepped forward and spoke in clear, perfect English that carried across the entire village. "This is Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Robert Mitchell, the man who showed kindness to our people many winters ago. She has brought our lost children home, and she comes bearing gifts for our survival." Chief Standing Bear studied Sarah for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was formal but not unfriendly. "Sarah Mitchell, you are welcome in our village. I am Standing Bear, chief of these people. My nieces tell me you saved their lives in the great storm." "I did what anyone would do, Chief Standing Bear," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I come seeking to do more than return your children safely." She turned to Tom and gestured for him to bring the special saddle from the wagon. As she had practiced, she presented it to Standing Bear with both hands. "This saddle belonged to my grandfather," she said formally. "I offer it to you as a sign of respect and friendship between our peoples." Standing Bear accepted the saddle, running his hands over the fine leather work. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah thought she saw approval in his eyes. "This is a gift worthy of honor," he said finally. "What do you ask in return?" "I ask for nothing," Sarah replied. "But I offer something. My family wishes to share our winter supplies with your people, and to give you cattle that can provide milk for your children and eventually grow into a herd of your own." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah could see surprise and hope on many faces, but also suspicion from others. "And what do you gain from this generosity?" Standing Bear asked. Sarah had expected this question. "The knowledge that we have honored a debt. Your grandmother, Wakanda, helped save my family's ranch many years ago. We have prospered because of her wisdom. Now we hope to share that prosperity with her people." Standing Bear looked to Wakanda, who nodded slowly. The old woman spoke to him in their language. and Sarah caught several words that sounded familiar from her lessons with Ayana. Finally, Standing Bear turned back to Sarah. Wakanda says you speak with an honest heart. She asks if you would be willing to stay and teach our young people your ways of raising cattle, so that we might learn to care for this gift properly. Sarah's heart soared. This was exactly what she had hoped for but hadn't dared to ask. I would be honored to stay and teach whatever I can, she said. Standing Bear smiled for the first time since their arrival. Then let us unload these wagons and begin preparations for a feast. Tonight we celebrate the safe return of our children and the beginning of a new friendship. As the village erupted in activity around the wagons, Sarah felt a hand touch her arm. She turned to find Wakanda standing beside her, the old woman's eyes twinkling with what looked like satisfaction. You are your father's daughter, Wakanda said quietly. He also had the courage to trust when trust was difficult. Thank you for sending Ayana and Winona to us, Sarah replied. They led us to each other, Wakanda nodded sagely. Sometimes the Great Spirit works through blizzards and lost children to show us the path we must take. You chose to follow that path, Sarah Mitchell. Now we will see where it leads us all. Sarah spent her first week in the Sioux village learning more than teaching. She observed how the people organized their daily lives, helped with essential tasks like gathering firewood and preparing food, and slowly earned the trust of those who had initially viewed her with suspicion. The supplies from the Mitchell Ranch made an immediate difference. Families that had been surviving on thin soup and scraps of dried meat suddenly had hearty meals, with plenty of flour for bread and beans for protein. Children who had been listless from hunger began to show energy and curiosity again. But Sarah knew the real challenge lay ahead. The food would only last through the winter. For the village to survive long-term, they needed to become self-sufficient, and that meant learning to manage the cattle and prepare for spring planting. The cattle had been placed in a makeshift corral near the village where they could be watched and protected from wolves. Every morning, Sarah worked with a group of young Sioux men who had volunteered to learn ranching skills. Among them was Ayana's cousin, a serious 18-year-old named Joseph who spoke excellent English and seemed to have a natural understanding of animals. Cattle are not like buffalo, Sarah explained as they watched the herd. Buffalo are wild and follow their instincts. Cattle must be guided and cared for like large children. They depend on us for everything. Joseph translated for the others, and Sarah could see both interest and skepticism on their faces. The Sioux had been hunters for generations, following buffalo herds across the plains. The idea of staying in one place and tending domestic animals was foreign to their traditional way of life. Show us how to milk the cows, requested Mary, a young woman whose baby had been crying from hunger despite her best efforts to nurse. My son needs milk to grow strong. Sarah led the group to one of the gentler cows, a brown and white Holstein named Bessie that had been hand-raised on the Mitchell Ranch. She demonstrated the proper technique for milking, explaining how to approach the cow calmly and maintain a steady rhythm. The secret is to talk to her, Sarah said, stroking Bessie's flank as she worked. Cows respond to gentle voices and confident hands. If you're nervous, they'll be nervous too. Mary tried next, her movements tentative at first. But as the warm milk began to flow into the bucket, her face lit up with wonder and relief. This will feed my baby and my nephew too, she said, tears in her eyes. Word of the successful milking spread quickly through the village. Within an hour, several other mothers had gathered to learn the technique. Sarah found herself conducting impromptu lessons throughout the day, each one building more confidence and enthusiasm among the villagers. But not everyone was convinced that these new ways would work. Grey Wolf, an older warrior who commanded respect among the traditionalists, approached Sarah as she was teaching a group of children how to gather eggs from the chickens Tom had brought in one of the wagons. Young woman, he said formally, you mean well, but you ask us to become like white farmers tied to one place like prisoners. This is not our way. Sarah set down the egg basket and faced him respectfully. She had been expecting this conversation and had thought carefully about how to respond. Grey Wolf, I understand your concerns, she said. I'm not asking you to stop being Sioux or to abandon your traditions. I'm offering tools that can help your people survive until the buffalo return and the government keeps its promises about adequate food supplies. The buffalo will not return, Grey Wolf said bluntly. The white soldiers and hunters have seen to that. And the government's promises are like snow in summer. They disappear when they are most needed. His honesty was harsh but accurate, and Sarah appreciated his directness. Then these cattle and crops may be your people's best hope for feeding their children. You can raise cattle and still be Sioux. You can plant corn and still honor your ancestors. Chief Standing Bear had been listening to their conversation from nearby. He approached and placed a hand on Grey Wolf's shoulder. "My old friend," he said gently, "our children grow thin while we debate the old ways versus the new ways. Perhaps we must learn to walk on both paths to survive." That evening, the village held a council meeting to discuss the future. Sarah was invited to sit with the elders, an honor that showed how much her standing had improved. Wakanda sat beside her, occasionally translating when the discussion moved too quickly for Sarah to follow. "Some fear that learning white ways will make us less Sioux," Standing Bear explained to Sarah. "Others believe we must adapt or die. What do you say to this?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Among my people, we have a saying. When the river changes course, the wise tree bends with the current rather than breaking against it." Learning. To raise cattle doesn't change who you are in your hearts. It just gives you new skills to protect what matters most: your families. An elderly woman named Bluebird Woman stood to speak. "I have lived through many hard winters," she said in heavily accented English. "I have seen children die from hunger when the buffalo were scarce and the government supplies did not come. If these cattle can prevent such suffering, then I say we must learn their care." One by one, other villagers spoke. Parents talked about their fears for their children's future. Young people expressed curiosity about these new skills. Even some of the traditionalists acknowledged that desperate times called for new solutions. Finally, Grey Wolf stood. The council fell silent, waiting to hear from one of the most respected voices in the village. "I am old," he said simply. "I remember when the plains were black with buffalo and our people could travel freely to follow the herds. Those days are gone, and they will not return in my lifetime. Perhaps not in my grandchildren's lifetimes." He looked directly at Sarah. "You have shown respect for our ways and asked for nothing in return for your help. If Standing Bear believes we should learn these cattle skills, and if Wakanda trusts you to teach them, then I will not stand in the way." A murmur of relief ran through the council. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These people were trusting her with their survival, and she was determined not to let them down. "I propose that we start slowly," Sarah said. "Let those who are interested learn about cattle care and farming. Let others continue to hunt and gather as they always have. As we see what works best, we can adjust our approach." Standing Bear nodded approvingly. "Wisdom speaks through the young white woman," he said. "We will try this path and see where it leads." As the council dispersed, Wakanda approached Sarah. "You handled that well," the old woman said. "You showed respect for our fears while offering hope for our future." "I just want to help," Sarah replied. "These people have become important to me, especially Ayana and Winona." "And you have become important to them," Wakanda smiled. "More important than you know. You are teaching them that not all white people are enemies, that friendship can exist between our peoples despite our differences." Looking around the village, Sarah saw families gathered around their fires, children playing games in the snow, and young people already discussing the cattle care lessons planned for tomorrow. For the first time since arriving, she felt truly hopeful about what they could accomplish together. The hardest part was behind them. They had established trust and found common ground. Now the real work of building a sustainable future could begin. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the first real test of everything Sarah had taught the village. As the snow melted and revealed patches of brown earth, the time had come to plant the seeds she had brought and to move the cattle to better grazing land. Sarah had been living with the Sioux for 4 months now, and the changes in the village were remarkable. The children who had been thin and weak were now healthy and energetic. The cattle had thrived through the winter, and 3 of the cows had given birth to healthy calves. Most importantly, A core group of young villagers had become skilled at cattle management and were eager to try farming. Joseph had emerged as a natural leader among the ranchers. He had developed an intuitive understanding of cattle behavior and could predict when a cow was about to calve or when the herd needed to be moved to fresh pasture. Mary had become the village's expert at milking and cheese-making, skills that ensured a steady supply of nutrition for the children. But it was Ayanna who surprised Sarah the most. The girl who had once been sent out desperately searching for help had become a bridge between the old ways and the new. She worked with Wakanda to identify traditional plants that could supplement the cattle's diet, and she helped translate farming concepts into terms that made sense to people who had always been nomadic. "Sarah," Ayanna said one morning as they prepared the ground for planting, "Grandmother wants to speak with you. She says it's important." Sarah found Wakanda sitting outside her lodge working on a beautiful piece of beadwork. The old woman's fingers moved with practiced precision despite her age, creating intricate patterns in blue, white, and red. "Sit with me, daughter," Wakanda said without looking up from her work. Sarah had grown accustomed to being called daughter by the elderly woman, and she treasured the informal adoption into the village family. "The planting goes well?" Wakanda asked. "Very well. Joseph thinks we'll have enough corn and beans to feed the village through next winter, with some left over for trade." Wakanda nodded approvingly. "And the cattle?" 23 head now, with more calves expected this summer. "If we're careful with breeding and don't slaughter too many for meat, the herd should double in 2 years." "Good." Wakanda held up the beadwork she had been creating. It was a ceremonial vest, magnificent in its detail and craftsmanship. "This is for you," Sarah's breath caught. The vest was clearly a work of art, the kind of garment reserved for special ceremonies and honored guests. "Wakanda, I can't accept something so beautiful. You must have worked on it for months." "I began it the day you arrived," the old woman confirmed. "It tells the story of a white woman who brought life to a dying village, who taught new ways while respecting old traditions. You will wear it tonight." "Tonight?" "Chief Standing Bear is calling a great council. Representatives from other villages will be here, and government agents from the reservation office. He wants to show them what we have accomplished." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. She had heard that some government officials disapproved of unauthorized aid to reservation communities, fearing it would make Native Americans less dependent on federal programs. There was also the matter of the cattle, which had been given without proper permits. "Will there be trouble about the supplies and cattle we brought?" Wakanda's eyes twinkled with something that looked like mischief. "Standing Bear is a wise chief. He has prepared for such questions." That evening, Sarah donned the ceremonial vest over her simple dress. The beadwork was even more stunning in the firelight, and she felt both honored and overwhelmed by the gift. As she approached the council fire, she saw that the village was filled with visitors. Other Sioux leaders sat in a circle with Standing Bear, while government agents and reservation officials occupied a separate area. Standing Bear rose as Sarah approached. "Sarah Mitchell," he announced in a voice that carried across the gathering. "You have lived among us for one season. You have taught our young people skills that will help them survive. You have asked for nothing in return except the chance to honor an old debt of friendship." He gestured for her to sit in the place of honor beside him. Sarah could feel the eyes of everyone present upon her, including the stern gazes of the government officials. "Tonight," Standing Bear continued, "we gather to witness something that has never happened before in the history of our people. Tonight we make a white woman an honorary member of our tribe, with all the rights and protections that such status provides." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized what was happening. This was not just a ceremony of gratitude. It was a political statement that would protect her from any legal challenges to her presence on the reservation. Wakanda rose and approached, Sarah with a magnificent eagle feather headdress. "This belonged to my grandfather, who was a great chief before the soldiers came," she said. "He would be proud to see it worn by someone who has shown such courage and generosity." As Wakanda placed the headdress on Sarah's head, Standing Bear spoke again. "From this day forward, Sarah Mitchell will be known among our people as Brings Life in Winter. She will have the protection of our tribe and the right to live among us for as long as she chooses." The Sioux villagers erupted in cheers and traditional songs. Even the visitors from other tribes nodded their approval at the unprecedented honor being bestowed. One of the government agents, a thin man with a severe expression, stood up. "Chief Standing Bear, I must protest. This woman has brought unauthorized supplies to the reservation. She has no permits for livestock or—" Standing Bear raised his hand for silence. "Agent Morrison. Brings Life in Winter is now a member of our tribe. The cattle belong to her as tribal property. The supplies were gifts between family members. Do you question our right to accept gifts from our own people?" Agent Morrison looked frustrated but had no legal response to this clever maneuvering. The designation of Sarah as a tribal member changed everything from a legal standpoint. "Furthermore," Standing Bear continued, "I invite you to examine the results of our winter. Our children are healthy, our people are learning new skills, and we have reduced our dependence on government rations by 30%. Is this not what you claim to want for us?" The other government officials exchanged glances. They could hardly argue against success, especially success that reduced the federal government's expenses. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the evening turned to celebration, Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers from multiple villages. Chiefs and elders praised her work and asked if she would consider teaching similar programs in their communities. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, Ayanna and Winona approached her. Both girls had grown taller and stronger during their time back in the village, and their eyes sparkled with health and happiness. "Sister Sarah," Ayanna said, using the new term of address that reflected Sarah's tribal adoption, "will you stay with us permanently?" Sarah looked around at the village that had become her second home, at the people who had welcomed her as family, and at the cattle grazing peacefully in the moonlight. She thought of her parents back at the Mitchell Ranch, who would be proud of what she had accomplished but would also understand her decision. "For a while longer," she said finally. "There's still much work to do, and I want to make sure the program can continue without me. But this will always be my home now, and you will always be my sisters." As Sarah walked back to her lodge wearing the ceremonial vest and eagle feather headdress, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. It had started with 2 lost children in a blizzard, and had become something none of them could have imagined. She had come to help a starving village survive the winter. Instead, she had found a new family, learned the meaning of true generosity, and discovered that the greatest gifts often come disguised as unexpected challenges. The stars shone brilliantly in the clear prairie sky, and Sarah knew that tomorrow would bring new lessons to teach, new problems to solve, and new opportunities to build bridges between different worlds. She had become Brings Life in Winter, and she intended to live up to that honored name for the rest of her life.